Hello and welcome to another episode of R&R's Ask the Expert. I'm Kayla McGowan, editor-in-chief, and today I have a good friend of mine on here, and we're talking about CAT events, T&M billing, ROMs, and so much more. So if you haven't guessed it, my special guest is Mike Allred, COO at Helixco. I'll stop talking now. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you, Kayla. I'm excited to be here and share some things. Although I'm not in that world day to day anymore, I've been out of it now for about 8 months. I ate, drank, and slept large loss and commercial for probably 18 years of my 25-year career. And it is a lot to go into it. And hopefully, some people that are listening to this can learn from the lessons I had to learn the hard way and mistakes that I've made along the way.
I mean, that's what this industry is all about, learning from people's lessons along the way, if you will say. Mistakes, I believe, but also a lesson because you pivoted and you've made the correct changes that you need to make, right? So before we even kick this off, I just wanted you to take a second and explain who Helixco is and how it fits into our industry so beautifully.
Yeah, so Helixco is a new spin on time and material billing, basically. It's really a full project management suite that uses time and material billing and blockchain contracts as its basis. The pretty awesome thing about it, without getting too deep in the weeds, is that everything that is in your bill is validated with name, date, times, geolocations, digital signatures. All your documents can be created within the same software and sent out for signature, and your guys can even do their daily paperwork in it. Everything is just, you can't argue with it. I mean, you take photos of your equipment and ID codes, it's all geolocated. Same thing with any consumables, and your staff clock in with a geolocation thing and a unique identifier. And even if they don't have a phone, because that's one thing that some people try to say, well, what about my labor? They don't have a phone. Well, one of our good friends, Chris Carter, sets up iPads. And he's got iPad stands for 35 bucks off of Amazon. He sets those up and everybody gets in line just like you used to line up and sign in on paper and clocks in. The thing that's great with the photo and digital signature, though, is it never fails that we have two or three people on larger projects with the exact same name, because a lot of people in other countries have use a family name, versus like our common name here. That's almost like their last name is their primary name. And so you will get three or four guys, and then the consultants and adjusters are coming back to you, and they'll be like, it looks like you triple billed or double billed this guy, or he was at two different projects, at the same time. Well, no, it's two different people. And so that with that, it's easy to prove. But it's also an enterprise level software that's pretty cool, that if you work with other contractors or you are an organization that has a lot of locations, we have a mapping system where you can actually send out job assignments and things like that to your partners and partner companies that you work with, and you can track what they're doing if it's your client. So it's a lot of, it is very complicated. It goes well beyond just being a T&M software. But the pretty awesome thing is that we've had we've been in existence for 6 years, really have turned the curve in the past year and a half with some new features and things that we've added. And got a lot of adoption going on. A lot of things are going to be announced in the next 2 to 3 weeks that are going to be pretty awesome for a lot of guys. So
Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to it. You guys have already done so much in the last year and a half that I've been in the back in the industry in this role, and I will definitely say I had the opportunity to actually use your software at Global Catastrophes training, and it was a great experience because for me personally, I've never been in the field and used any type of software like yours. Honestly, I've always done everything by paper and pen, and so it was really cool to see how easy it is getting your username set up and all of that fun stuff. But I know you have some really cool stuff in the works, so I'm looking forward to those announcements coming out in the future. So with that being said, cat season is right around the corner. I would definitely say we're kind of in one right now with the winter advisories and just the 2 feet of snow. But I think one thing we've learned in the last couple of years, and maybe even in the history of our industry, is that the predictability changes so often. Like it's not, before we used to be like, oh, hurricane season, we're going to see something in September, October, November. And now, I mean, we didn't have one last year. And then we had fires and we had freeze in January. It's like, what is going on? So, how can contractors prepare for the upcoming seasons for this year, which the reason why we're asking this question, and you're probably going to get to it, is because you should already be preparing now for the upcoming seasons, right?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, the mistake is that a lot of people do, and it's okay. It's not really a mistake. There are some people that only chase hurricanes. But really, if you're wanting to get into the commercial service side of this industry and, want to build out a good commercial or catastrophic team, you need to exactly do what you were saying. You need to look at all year round. It needs to be, you're looking at freezes, floods, tornadoes, hurricanes, wildfires, especially out west, multitude of different opportunities that are out there. You don't want to pigeonhole yourself into one thing. But, even if you're a one track kind of guy, and I know a lot of those guys, I've worked for some of them that only want to go after the hurricane work because the rest of the year they're busy, doing their own stuff. But they want to chase the big dollars for the hurricanes. And it is big dollars. I mean, there's no beating around the bush about it. Lots of opportunity there. But the biggest thing is you cannot take your staff into that situation once a year and expect them to be prepared mentally, physically, and trainability on whatever software that you are using. Hopefully it's Helixco. But T&M is a different animal, especially if you're doing Xactimate in your residential life day in and day out. It is a major learning curve on the level of documentation because everything has got to be justified and noted from trash bags, trash cans, dehumidifiers, trucks, tractor trailers, third-party vendors. I mean, you're gathering tons of data and information to support your invoice. And most guys are going to lose a lot of money and leave a lot on the table just because of poor training. And, the complaint that I get from a lot of owners sometimes is like, well, we do on-the-job training, or, I can't afford to train them and them not be actually busy doing work. Well, my flip argument to that, to people I've worked for in the past, is that the difference of having them trained can be millions of dollars. We're not talking, and you're paying this guy $20 to $30 an hour. That's chump change, in comparison to what he can cost you by not being properly trained. So taking 3 hours a month to make sure your staff is trained is invaluable if you plan on being in this industry.
No, I agree 100%. And I think we've seen too where people maybe haven't focused on their training and they end up losing the job or get kicked off of a job site. I think that's another thing too, is preparedness is really key. And that's, not just the products and materials that you have to have, but, your staff knowing how to leverage the platforms you're leveraging or using. And then your partners, right? You have partners, there's subs and all of the work that we see in CAT. It's not just you going and doing it all. You're always going to have a sub or two or three that you need to rely on too. And you guys all need to be on the same page. I think we see it time in and time out. Or I think there's some things that we've seen or I've heard where, people think they can just leave their shop at home and go chase, and that's not necessarily the case either, right? So your staff at home has to be ready for when the staff they depend on goes out into that situation, who's going to do what where they're gone because they can't do both. And I think a lot of times because we're in an industry where we just love to serve people, we sometimes pinch ourselves up by doing that, right? And it's nobody's fault. I just think we want to help people on a daily basis. And so sometimes our operations suffer because our heart and our mind is telling us to go help, right? Um, Go ahead, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that's absolutely. I mean, I have a lot of empathy. That's the reason I kind of fell into this industry by mistake. I was running medical clinics when I lost my house in Charlie Francis Gene in 2004 in Central Florida. And, that was my first experience. I'd done flipped houses all through college and stuff, and done construction and had a small construction company. And that was my first experience with water damage and mold. I'd never seen it. I've been doing stuff since I was like 19 years old. And, but then, once I came into this industry, it was like I really had empathy. I understood what the homeowner and business owner was going through because your house or your business is one of your largest investments. It's
Mhm.
your child, really. I mean, because I've also owned my own business, and I definitely get that. And so there's a lot of guys that don't get that, but definitely going out and helping each other is a big part of why a lot of us get satisfaction. It's the adrenaline rush and the fact that we're able to be the heroes all the time that a lot of people choose to be in this industry, and so that is a very important aspect of it.
Yeah, no, 100% well said. I will definitely say I think most of us have probably had our own loss, whether we'd like to admit it or not, right? I fortunately did not have my first loss until I was already in this industry. So I knew what to look for. However, the claims process was a grueling one, if I'm being quite honest, and we'll get to that later on down the road in this conversation. But, speaking of claims process, we know billing and documentation is like a pain point. It's a strength, but it's also a pain point. So I think T&M billing is becoming a bigger topic of conversation outside of large and commercial loss and just cat, but I also think that it's under a little scrutiny too because it is becoming a bigger topic of conversation. So I know you've wrote some articles on this, but what does a defensible T&M file look like for success? Let's be real. I know that's a big question, but I think to your point, it's knowing how to use your software, also starting with a ROM and things like that. But what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, we can go through a lot of the best practices, but as far as the documentation, we'll hit on that first. I mean, for the longest time, in our industry, it was paperwork and it's paperwork, paperwork, paperwork. And you got on a $20 million project, you'll have five-inch ring binders full of nothing but paperwork. I mean, and it's arduous to try to even keep up with. It is a pain. You make a mistake. I worked for a company one time that shipped it and never made it back to the home office, and so they lost billions of dollars worth of, millions of dollars worth of, paperwork. I mean, I think it cost them 1.2 million that they had to try to fight and negotiate for in court, just to validate that they had actually done the work through, other testimonies and stuff because they lost all that documentation. So, but now technology, you can buy ever since the year 2000, the e-sign Act passed in the United States, and the federal government adopted that digital signatures are valid, and also forced all other federal agencies, including FEMA, to accept that. We are just now in our industry. I mean, you could buy houses and cars and everything else without seeing it, but we are just now in our industry getting to where digital is being accepted. And people have gone by old playbooks, no matter what the law is. So the biggest thing is to validate everything that you do, and that really starts with what you were talking about with a ROM. So, good practices, is when you get there, first thing is you need to have a good solid contract and terms and conditions. And we could do a whole show on that, and I could go over sample terms and conditions that I've learned throughout my years of doing this, and some that I've created here recently, because of like the E-Verify thing that's really it's been around for years, but ever since this administration has came in and doing what they're doing with deporting and things like that, it has become a much bigger issue in the last 2 years. And so
Mhm.
really need to have some statements in there and some agreements with your labor companies on front on that. But the biggest thing is, once you get there to the job site is to create a solid ROM, and it's a rough order of magnitude. Back in the day, we used to call it not to exceeds. And I can't tell you how much money not to exceeds cost me when we got to the end of the job. And here we were 20% higher than what we thought we were going to be. Or we were asked to do additional stuff and we did a verbal and we got ourselves in trouble. So the problem with the not to exceed is that's your cap. And that's what the adjuster is going to tell the underwriters, hey, this isn't going to exceed 500,000.
Mhm.
Well, with the ROM, it is tied to a scope of work. So you're given that $500,000, but it is to perform A, B, and C. So when D happens, you do a change order, just like you do in construction, and you send that to the client for approval before you move forward. Hey, we found fungal growth behind the sheetrock that we were removing. Now we got to do this, this, and that, and follow these standards and have it tested and bring in a hygienist. It's going to be an extra, $200,000 for this area. You get that approved up front. Those are your best things to protect yourself financially at the end. That way there's no surprises. Because I've worked for companies that did time and material that got the contract signed, the terms and conditions, and the price list. And then the business owner was thinking, oh, this is going to be a $50,000 loss. We get done and it's $1 million, because they have no concept. They don't do what we do on a day-to-day basis. So if you
Mhm.
don't present that ROM, you're going to have pushback, you're going to have anger. And I generally like to have mine a little bit higher just for a little bit of flexibility. I'd like to have an extra 10% in there for unknowns and things that where you're not having to run for every little thing that may cause a problem. But the cool thing about our software is that you see your burn rate every day if you're using the software properly. It is there every single day, and you can see where you're at. So if you're getting close to that ROM dollar amount and you got 5 days left and you don't think you're going to make it, then you can stop and do that change order. The other thing is consultants, one of the first things they like to ask when they come onto the job site is, hey, what's your burn rate? Well,
Mhm.
our burn rate flexes every day in this industry. I don't know why that has become like a gauge of, how big a job is going to be because it's always front end heavier on equipment and stuff and then back end heavier on labor, and it's never consistent. But the cool thing about Helix is, you know, I can send you a history of the daily burn going all the way back to day one that we were here. This is what it is today, and I can update you every day and let you know what our burn rate was for that day. And that's powerful. That is powerful information to be able to have at your fingertips on anybody's phone or iPad or laptop, whichever way you want to access it.
Yeah, and I would definitely say too, we have to tell a story. Most people that we're helping, they don't understand what we do on a daily basis. And so if we're able to show them regular updates, it tells them without going too far into detail what we were doing, how we were doing it, and where we stayed within the cost. Again, I was fortunate enough to use your guys' software and we could see our burn rate. Also, if we were going to exceed or if we were going to stay under budget or hit budget. And I think you said something really powerful is, I always like to have a 10% cushion essentially. And the great thing about that is things happen. We know things can happen. And wouldn't you rather have 10% cushion that you didn't have to use than not have that cushion and exceed? I think it's one of those things we kind of need to see CYA ourselves on all fronts because again, we're touching people's money, homes, businesses, and so it is near and dear to their heart, right? And I think building a ROM was really cool to see because I had never built one, and it made it easier for my team and myself to understand, okay, when we finish all of our billing at the end of the project, we can actually see where we exceeded in some places, but also came under in other, but still stayed within our budget, which I think is huge. And we've talked about that on your podcast as far as, Xactimate and Cotality and everything like that. That is so great for our industry. But I also think too, with T&M and even, large losses happening more often, it's something that our industry is starting to adopt even on the residential side of things. I know people do square foot. I think that there's just in our industries, we can do things several different ways. And it's really important to kind of embrace that. But I think I told you this on your show, you know, when I did my first ROM and T&M, and I was like, wait, why don't we do this like in everything that we do? That was a question that came up in my mind, and I was like, people are probably going to call me crazy, but just me, first time doing it, I was like, wait, why don't we do this on a regular basis? I mean, you could still use Xactimate and Cotality, right? Like that's the other thing is I don't think, it's not about, oh, you only have to use one software at that point. You can actually still leverage the stuff we're using day to day, but
Yep.
building a ROM and T&M help you actually see the scope fully and where you exceeded and where you came under, which can help you in the long run of planning, right? Which you should be actually reviewing what you've done in the past to understand what potentially could happen for the upcoming seasons, which I think is another big thing. So, you know, if you had a perfect crystal ball and, in the next 5 years, do you think T&M and just building a ROM in general and residential and things like that will be a bigger part of our industry?
Oh, absolutely. It's already going that way. We have had several underwriters that we have spoke to. We got a couple of programs that are actually going to roll out this year that are for residential losses. That has been traditionally Xactimate. A lot of contractors are also pushing to kind of go this route because they feel like Xactimate isn't always fair, especially if you're doing anything like high rises or you're downtown or condos and things like your guys are having to hump equipment up 3 flights of stairs or downtown Orlando, sometimes we would have to park 3 blocks away, and our guys in Xactimate don't cover all that, and then you're fighting to try to use these labor only line items, to kind of justify it. But the big thing about the ROM that, I think a lot of people miss, and when I teach my classes, one of the first questions I ask is, how many of you do a ROM? And, it's very few. It's very few. It's, some of the guys that do the commercial stuff. And then I'm like, okay, on your residential losses, how many of you create a drying plan before you start? I still see hardly no hands. Well, that is part of our standard. That is in the S500 that you should have a drying plan before you begin work. Okay. And your ROM, if you create it right, and I have templates in our software to kind of help guide you through that, there's your drying plan. You're following the standard by creating that ROM. And so, yeah, absolutely. I mean, guys should be doing it whether they're using Xactimate or Symbility or any of those types of programs, or especially T&M, to create that drying plan or that rough order of magnitude, which is your scope of work on the front end, and try to tie it close to a dollar amount as well, is always a good thing, even if you're dealing with Mrs. Smith's house, because Mrs. Smith may think that it's $500 to clear up her water damage and she don't have to file a claim. When we all know that our average water loss is, close to $3,000.
Yep.
you
Yeah.
know, so it's like, people in our industry and in lots of industries, we get into it to where we only deal with people that we associate with every day and professionally, and we all know what we're talking about, and we mistakenly assume that our clients understand what they're doing, and they have no clue, no
Yeah.
clue.
And I would say too, to your point, most people are like, "Oh, is this something I can do myself?" Right? We know that and it's always been that way. It's not just because of the year that we're in. It's always been a thing. People will say like, "Well, if I can do this part myself, like it'll save me, to your point, $500 or whatever." But in the
Yeah.
grand scheme of things, it's because they don't really understand. And so that's where our communication comes into play too, right? I think that's another really big thing. Communicating with your community as well before cat seasons ever start is, I think, another really big deal. So, I think large loss, cat events, commercial, it's all evolving, right? If someone's new in the space and they're wanting to dip their toe into that world, what are some like key things that contractors need to know before they ever dive into the world of large loss or cat?
All right, first and foremost, I recommend that if you are just now looking to jump into it, is that you find another company to partner with and work up underneath so you can learn the ropes. The Because that kind of ties into my number one point that I tell people when they come to our class. Before you go running to chase a hurricane and you're excited that you landed that $2 million project, you better make sure that you have the line of credit or the financial fortitude to basically finance that whole project for up to 2 years, 1 year minimum. I mean, the last company I just worked for has just now collected some money going all the way back to Hurricane Ian. That's 3 years ago. I mean, it is, especially if you're doing FEMA type of work. If they're relying on FEMA reimbursement, the whole level, you need to do some study before you do anything that's government related or schools or anything like that. Your guys that are hauling off the dumpsters for you all the time, well, now they got to actually produce waste manifest, from the dump. I mean, the level of details that you got to have in documentation for FEMA work is a whole nother level. But the biggest thing is the financial side of things, and learning the ropes, learning the T&M, learning how to respond. Teaming with another company is always the best thing. And there's lots of companies out there that are willing to teach you and to bring you in under their wings and build relationships because they need help. They need help. I mean, I would go on CAT and I would call in 15 or 20 different companies to help us out. And, having that relationship was strong because that way I knew that they would follow my instructions and that they would follow the SOPs of my client, and do the job the right way and take coaching from me as they learned. And then the cool thing too is that it never fails that I learned something from them. I mean, anybody that feels like they're at the top of their game is wrong. There's always somebody that can do something a little bit better than you, that
Yeah.
has a little bit more knowledge than you or a specialty in this area here, and because, one of the other big things is that the guys really need to pre-negotiate your rates. Do not, if you're going to have to rent equipment or pay for transportation's a tough one to negotiate on the front end, but terms is really, really important that you work out with your subcontractors and your vendors and that you have these relationships on the front end. Because I will tell you, if you go to call one of these big rental companies and you haven't dealt with them, you haven't built a relationship with them, you're at the bottom of their list, because they got 50 other contractors that they do have relationships with. that are begging for the same generator that you're asking for. And
Mhm.
that guy, those guys are going to get it first because they have relationships. So building relationships with those types of vendors is important on the front end, and to have multiple resources for everything that you need, whether it's equipment rental or fuel disbursement, and fuel trucks, labor, roofers to do tarping, everything you could think of, dumpsters, porta johns. I recommend that you have two, three, sometimes even four resources, because the guy that you call may be out of everything by the time you get a hold of him and you land your contract, you know. Um, we can keep going. I mean, we'll kind of move on to the next thing, but there's a ton of things that are, that contractors need to be prepared for mentally. And, one thing I will slip in while I'm still gibbering is that one of my biggest pet peeves is that someone goes out and they put someone in charge and they give them a health and safety officer title. And this guy don't even have his OSHA 10. And really, you should have your OSHA 30 if you're supervising others. OSHA 10 to actually be doing the work, especially on construction sites. But when you're doing demo and things like that, every one of your supervisors in your little groups of 10 should at least have their OSHA 10. But your project manager or your health and safety officer, those guys need to have at least their OSHA 30. If not, you're going to get sued or get fined.
Yeah, I was just gonna say you touched on something. Barry Rice and I have been talking about like a lot of the violations, the top 10 OSHA violations, and they'll come and they'll cite you. You're not like just because you think you're getting away with it doesn't mean you are. I think we also know that in the world of cat events, that's when OSHA is going to show up, right? That's the time that they are going to ask you for proof of your fit tests and things like that. I know that there's some issues with lockout and tagging your stuff. There's a lot of stuff that actually does affect us. And to your point, just cross all your T's, dot all your I's, and make sure everything is set. Because at the end of the day, even if you have subs on your job site, it's still your responsibility. So I just for it's a bigger lift than I think a lot of people think, but I think also to your point, team up with somebody because it may not be for you either. It may not be what you think. And so don't put all your eggs in one basket. Try it and see it. And it's okay if it's not for you. I mean, I would much rather go out into a job under somebody else and say, you know what, this just isn't for me and not have really any crazy losses to your point. Because you just had 3 years on that Ian claim. That's insane. Is that a mis that can close your business? Let's be real.
Yep. Yeah. And to your point about, it may not be for you. I've got a good friend of mine. I'm not going to throw him under the bus. We're still friends to this day. But he traveled with me 3 years ago during it. And he was like done after 2 weeks. It's like, this is not for me, this is for the birds. But he kept some of his staff out there for about another week. But then they were back home. They were like,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, apologetic and everything. I'm like, no, it's fine. You don't know until you try. Some
Yeah.
guys go and they fall in love with it. Like me, I'm an adrenaline junkie. And that's the one thing I do miss about not being on that side. I'm watching these freeze events and I'm like, getting my blood pumping. And it's like, oh yeah, I'm not going. Because it is an adrenaline, and it's adrenaline falling in on the backside of a storm and making sure that everything is done and buckled down and tight. And, there's a lot of things that go into prep, that we can get into from, trailer prep and safety and vehicle maintenance and spare tires and spare fuel and everything else, especially after a hurricane, sat
Yeah.
phone and Starlinks. I mean, the list goes on and on and on, to make sure that you're prepared. And if you're not for that world and don't have that investment, you've got to team up with somebody else. They're going to help support you while you learn the ropes, and you're probably still going to make more money in that short 1 to 3 months than you ever have in 3 months in your entire career.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would definitely say to your point, you have stories of where it's worked, hasn't worked. Obviously, I mean, I love adrenaline rush too. So, I think that's why I really was like so excited to go do all the training that I did in 25 and I'll continue some training in 26. And it's just, it also tests your limits, right? It tests your physical, mental capacity. And a lot of times, we haven't even touched on this. You're not sleeping in a hotel or a trailer. You're in your car. Like you may not shower for days, even a week. You may not have fresh water. There's all these things that go into it. Yeah, it looks like attractive and like so much fun, but there's a different side that isn't often always talked about. So we've talked about a ton. I know.
I've showered with Dehu pump out water. So if that tells anybody how rough it is, and it stunk because it came out of the nasty building, but we were
Right.
to get clean. So yeah, it is not glamorous by any means. I've had five people to a camper, which is probably against the rules because each person is supposed to have like 150 square feet of space, and there's no, we probably had 200 to the five of us before. So, but you're roughing it. That's what it's about. I know guys that have slept on stacks of DUs and air movers just to have a place to sleep,
Mhm.
sometimes, especially in those first few days. After you get settled in, things get, services start running, you can get water delivered and things like that. But those first 3 to 5 days, depending on how severe the storm, Hurricane Michael was even longer than that in some areas because it took 3 hours just to make it to your job site and then 3 hours to make it back to where you were staying at each day. But yeah, it is not glamorous, so it's not for everybody. That is for sure. But if it is for you, you're going to be hooked and you'll be in this industry forever.
Yeah, no, well said. And I will definitely say to your point, I mean, there's just some instances that happen where it's weeks before you ever have any resources. I know with the flooding in Texas, when I talked to Clark Brown when he was out there, they couldn't get a lot of their resources there by truckload. It was like people putting stuff in a vehicle and driving it down. So, now you have windshield time and all that stuff. So there's a lot of things to consider, which means it generally pulls you off of the job site if you're having to go get resources. So there's a lot of things that go into really planning and executing out in the large loss, even commercial and
Yep.
cat loss. So I know we've talked about a ton. I know we're gonna have to have another episode where we talk about a few other things. But if a contractor could improve maybe one thing before the upcoming seasons, I know we're already in a season. What should it be that they actually improve? And I think we touched on this a little bit before, but what are your thoughts on that?
I really think it's training, and it's training on the level of documentation that you got to have because I have had seasoned contractors turn their paperwork into me, and I'll give you an example without mentioning a name. This contractor's been in the business for 20 years, and he did time and material stuff and turned it into me and my team, and we're going through it. And his guys obviously were not trained on a regular basis. They saw two flex ducts going from the desk and into the building, so they counted that as two. When there's four sections each direction, so it should have been eight. And so over the course of a 30-day stabilization project, it was stupid amount of money, and that was just one item. So training your guys to know the level of documentation, understand time and material, good job diary notes, project manager summary notes, all that kind of stuff, how to take the photos. The next biggest thing is you cannot take a guy that has been doing residential day in and day out and put him in charge of tracking your equipment and document because he don't know what this stuff is. He does not know what your power distribution is. He don't know what a 200 amp panel is from a spider box, And so the amount of money that I have seen lost because of poor documentation and missed items is huge. And so training is the biggest thing. And like I said, with most staff, you could do 2 to 3 hours a month. That's minimal. And then you got a team that is ready to travel all year round.
No, good points. And I would definitely say 2 hours a month in the grand scheme of things is minute. And it's two more hours than not having any, I think is the other thing. This industry thrives on training regardless of what type of work you're doing. So this is no different. And to your point, you can't expect anybody to just not do it and then go out there and then you expect them to have all their ducks in a row. That's just not the way it works. And it's really important for us to just emphasize the importance of training. And even the preparedness side of things, we can talk about that in another episode, but having all of your equipment, having your trailers, having all the things that you need to even deploy you and your team. But I've had a great time talking about all this. I think we talked about a ton today. Before we sign off, anything you'd like to add to
Yeah,
this
I mean,
episode?
just on our last point, if you want to ruin and wait and get rid, chase off a good employee, you take him on camp without training him. He is going to get so frustrated that he doesn't know what he's going to do, and he's going to go home and never come back to see you again. I have had to learn that lesson the hard way. I've had staff quit because of poor training and felt like the stress was more than they can handle because they didn't know what to do. And I've lost good people over it, early in my career. So that is another important aspect. It all starts with training, and that's whether it's new software, best practices, the whole 9 yards. Spend time training with your guys. I mean, if you're going to get into this commercial world, lots of money to be made there, but you can't make that money if your people don't know how to do the job.
No, well said, 100%. I agree strongly with that. For all of you watching, thank you for tuning in, and we will see you on the next episode of Ask the Expert. Take care.